Tomorrow, the White House will shine a spotlight on social media with a summit designed to bring together digital leaders for a conversation on the opportunities and challenges of today's online environment. But Facebook and Twitter, figures at the center of the so-called challenges of today's online environment, were not actually invited.
Those two social media giants are subjects of new polling from RealClearPolitics. RCP surveyed potential 2020 voters on whether government should break up different big tech companies. Facebook faced the most calls for scrutiny, with 38% saying that regulations were necessary. Then came in Google at 32%, Amazon at, I said that weird, Amazon, that's how you say that, at 30%, and Apple at 28%. When asked which companies' regulations were unnecessary for, Apple and Amazon were tied with 55%, Twitter at 53%, Facebook came in at the bottom with 48%. So joining us to talk about these results and also the polling questions they did on trade is Carl Cannon. He's RealClearPolitics Washington Bureau Chief. Great to see you, sir.
Thanks.
So we actually, this is really interesting stuff that you dug into, and we really haven't seen numbers on tech to this extent, and also on trade and how Americans feel about free trade, how they feel about Trump's approach to trade. So I actually wanted to start there. One of the questions you asked is, over the last decade or so, do you believe free trade has been an overall positive or negative for America? And 50% said positive, 30% said negative, but that's a good number of people, 20%, who are not sure.
Right. You know, I may be reading too much into it, but it's almost divided. That question, do you favor free trade? I mean, people know that intellectually that globalization's been good for them. They go to Walmart, they buy these products. They know that unemployment rate is low. They know the world economy is doing pretty well.
Yeah.
And yet only 50% say so. The 30% say no. These are the people who still don't like NAFTA. They supported Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders last time. And then 20% said, I don't know. And that's that 20%. You'd think in this economy that number would be higher.
Well, and not to mention, since this free trade has been the bipartisan consensus in this town for decades now. So you would think that that would have taken hold with the American public, but they continue to be skeptical.
That's right. And Gallup has been polling about this for decades. Now, they asked the question slightly different than we did. Our poll's done by John Della Volpe, who's you guys know, this very good pollster in Boston. Anyway, the Gallup numbers, they have these graphs, and every once in a while these two numbers will intersect. People don't like trade or people do like trade. But if you look at the year, that's when there's a bad recession.
Yeah.
1992. Then, you know, in the meltdown, the late 2007, 2008, that's when it happens. In this economy, you'd expect 70% or 60% to be in favor of free trade. So, you know, there's a lot of things.
Interesting.
It shows me just how much the president and how the Democrats, really, everybody has just changed the Overton window. That 2016 completely changed how Americans look at trade. Like you said, we're in the midst of a pretty good economy, at least from the numbers wise. And almost 50%, at least 50% will say free trade is not positive for America.
Yeah, and you know, we're in a time, and this is not all bad, people are questioning things they've been told. They're questioning some of the, you know, socialism. You know, when I was like I got millennial kids, when I was their age, that was, you couldn't go.
It's a dirty word.
You couldn't go there.
Yeah.
People are saying, I saw Matt Damon on television, or I think it was Matt Damon. It was a movie star. He said, well, I've been to socialist countries. They're not that bad. And I thought, well, this is interesting. So, but, you know, in one sense, it's alarming that people who sort of don't know much about history are casually questioning things that you thought were solved. The Democrats go, you know, this is settled science. Come on, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, the Earth was not really flat.
Right.
On the other hand, it's nice to question assumptions now and then.
I also think that it's a particular point in time. I mean, Trump sort of actualized some of that, but we're also in a place where we had that financial collapse, right? We're supposed to be recovering, and yet it's not working out for people the way. I mean, most of the jobs that we lost in the recession were middle-class jobs. Most of the jobs we gained out of the recession were low-income jobs.
Right.
So I think we're also surveying the wreckage of that and realizing that this economy is not structured for the majority of people to succeed. You have a question, though, specifically about Trump's policy to impose new tariffs on China. You asked whether that's overall positive or negative for America. Not great numbers for Trump here. 48% say negative, only 39% say that his China policy has been positive.
Well, this is, okay, but this is the 50% then asserting themselves.
Right.
These are people saying, wait a minute, you're going to really go back to Smoot-Hawley? I mean, how far are you going to take this protectionist rhetoric?
Right.
And tariffs, Now, tariffs was if there was a consensus, you mentioned this, on trade, it was that the tariffs of 1930, Smoot-Hawley, there's that great scene in Risky Business where Ben Stein is talking about Hawley-Smoot, he calls it. But this tariffs signed into law by Herbert Hoover exacerbated the Depression, didn't make things better, made things worse, and maybe made it globally worse. And so people still have, tariffs is still not a good word. It's still a word like socialism that some people say, wait a minute, that's not good.
But how much of that also, Carl, is just the fact that Trump's name is in the question, that President Trump's policy? Say, alternatively, if the question was phrased, would you support new tariffs on China? Do you have an overall or positive, negative view of tariffs on China?
Well,
yeah, that's interesting.
Sure, but I think tariffs and Trump go together. I don't think that would change it markedly.
That's interesting.
But your broader point, if this same policy were being pursued by another president, would you see these numbers? Look, we've seen this before. If you poll tested George W. Bush's idea to allow you to partially privatize Social Security, very popular.
Right.
Bush's name is attached to all the Democrats. So, wait a minute, I don't want that. Same.
Well, that thing went down in flames.
Obamacare.
Well, Obamacare.
That idea went down in flames.
And Obamacare is a great example.
Yeah.
If you go through
ACA,
some of the key provisions in the
Yeah.
Affordable Care Act, people say, yeah, I like that. And, oh, it's Obamacare. I don't like that.
Yeah.
So this is the partisan effect.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and we were talking about this a little bit. In some ways, I think that's fair because especially on something like trade policy where it really is in the president's hands, if you don't trust this president, and I feel this way because I'm generally supportive of a more protectionist approach. I'm skeptical of the just blanket free trade as written by big corporations consensus, but I don't really trust this guy implementing it, and I don't think it's going to work out well because I don't have confidence in his ability as a negotiator and a strategist. So in some ways, I think that's fair. You also, though, you take a look at big tech, which is obviously timely, president having his big social media summit. This is a almost weekly topic of conversation. What should be done around the power and influence of these social media giants? And as we kind of went through in the intro, you asked very specifically about Facebook, Google, Amazon, and Apple, whether it was necessary or unnecessary for the government to break up these companies. There's still a basically majority of the country that do not think that this is necessary. But if you're Facebook, and you've got 38% of the country saying maybe we should break you up, I think that is pretty uncomfortable.
Well, and Crystal, only 48% said unnecessary. So they couldn't get.
They don't have a majority.
They don't have a majority who are supporting them.
And yeah, if you start to think, look, everybody saw when Mark Zuckerberg came here, he got mixed reviews. But Facebook is always seems to be in this position where they're always apologizing. Oh, we won't do that again. And then somebody else finds something else that they we won't do that again. And I think they
haven't come clean.
I think that's they're in a little.
It just goes to show Apple, a company which had many problems in its own right, but has made data privacy its first. It emphasizes it to its consumers constantly.
That's a good point.
They're at 28%. They have 55%. Not a great majority, but still a majority. Whereas Facebook, with its just complete emphasizing on selling consumer data and, like you said, not having a proactive strategy, it's costing them in the general public.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that the negative press around Facebook and the last election probably plays into those numbers as well. You also asked.
It all comes back to Trump, doesn't it?
Yeah, for better or worse, in my view, for worse. But you also asked a series of questions about concerns that people had. And I was interested in the sort of phrasing of these questions. So, for example, you said Mexico is not cracking down to stop the production and smuggling of fentanyl into the U.S. Are you concerned or not concerned? And you had overwhelming majority here who says they're concerned by that. I thought this was interesting that you stated it as a fact, that this is happening, and then asked people how they felt about it. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, what we were really trying to do is compare China to Mexico. So that we weren't trying to prejudge it in a way that disadvantaged Mexico. And because my assumption was, and I was wrong about this when we drew the poll, that people would have more Americans would have more charitable views about Mexico on trade and migration and narcotics than China, and they don't really. They're not much different.
It's pretty much, when you tested these 4 questions around what China's doing and what Mexico is doing, you got very similar results, basically. People were very concerned about both of the countries.
It was interesting, too, to me, because in the next question, it was Mexico's not doing enough to stop the flow of migrants from Central America to the U.S. border. 65% said concerned, 29% said not concerned. So people are more concerned about drugs
Fentanyl.
than they are about illegal
And about
immigration.
China stealing trade secrets, too.
Right. I mean, I
that's-
find that very interesting. Do you think it's because of the politicization of the migration debate?
Well, I don't know. I
Yeah.
think it's because people are better than drugs.
People are very worried
good
about the
point.
opioid crisis, and it's
Yeah.
touched a lot of lives.
That's right.
This was really interesting stuff that you guys dug into. Thank you so much for coming by and sharing the results with us. We appreciate it a lot.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Carl. Next on Rising, the highest security unit in the highest security federal prison in the country. Our next guest reports on our 18-month investigation of Florence ADX, commonly known as Supermax.
She said she uncovered hunger strikes, force feedings, reading and communication restrictions, and complete isolations, and a lack of transparency, importantly, about all of those problems. We're going to talk to her next.